各位早晨，首先各位官員咧會喺台。
Good morning. The officials will first stand in front of the podium for photo call.
Thank
you very much. Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. The press conference will start. Let me first introduce, we have Mr. Frank Chen, Secretary for Transport and Housing, Mr. Michael Wong, Secretary for Development, Ms. Agnes Wong, Permanent Secretary for Transport and Housing, Ms. Mabel Chen, Permanent Secretary for Transport and Housing, Ms. Bernadette Lin, Permanent Secretary for Development, and Mr. Ricky Lau, Permanent Secretary for Development, as well as Mr. Ivan Chung, Director of Planning. We will first hear from the Secretary for Development before the Secretary for Transport and Housing will speak. Mr. Wong. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to be here with you and the Secretary for Transport Housing, as well as our team, to talk about initiatives covering development as well as transport and housing. In relation to land supply, we have to first make an assessment. We need to work out land demand as well as supply. That's the objective of updating Hong Kong 2030 Plus. This Hong Kong 2030 has given us an update of land demand and supply forecasts. It also talks about twin cities and three circles, as well as the vision of the Northern Metropolis development strategy. We have taken into account changes as well as other relevant factors before making adjustments. At the beginning of the year, the 14th five-year plan was promulgated, and there are a number of initiatives involved, and we have also taken them into account. In relation to the latest forecast of between 2019 and 2048, we lack about 3,000 hectares of land. For land demand, that includes housing land, economic land, GIC facilities, open space, and transport infrastructure. Altogether, they amount to about 5,800 to 6,200 hectares. After calculating 3,200 of committed land supply, that includes the new town of Tung Chung extension as well as Hong Shui Kiu Ha Chun development, we need about 3,000 hectares of land in addition. You may ask, back in 2016 when we first consulted about Hong Kong 2030 Plus, we said that there was a lack of 1,200 hectares of land. How come that now it becomes 3,000 hectares? You may recall that in the discussion of the long-term housing of the task force on land supply, it was said that the assessment back in 2016 was too conservative. They have underestimated land's demand for further development. The Planning Department, the Development Bureau, as well as other policy bureaus have adopted an innovative approach to make an updated assessment of land demand. We have considered the need to enhance provision of home space, that is, to increase space per capita. If it's increased by about 10%, that means it will be 215 square feet per capita. If it's increased by 10%, that means is about 237 square feet per capita. In Tokyo is 210, and in Shanghai is 260. Singapore is 270, and in Shenzhen 300 square feet per capita. We also need to take into account land demand from INT. Back then it was 130 hectares of land we need. Now it's over 300. We also need to take into account the opportunities given to us by the 14th Five-Year Plan as well as the GBA Outline Development Plan. We have also adopted some aggressive assumption. Well, for per capita land use is 2.7 square meter. We think that it can be increased to 3.5 square meters. We also need to cater for contingencies. In terms of medium and long term, there is potential land supply of 4,100 hectares. So that is why the chief executive said there is no need to worry about the shortage of 3,000 hectares of land because we are confident that we'll be able to identify sufficient land supply. In the policy address, there are two development proposals for Metropolis. There is the Kaoyichao artificial land of the Harbour Metropolis as well as the Northern Metropolis. Well, the potential land supply is above the shortage of 3,000. In the end, there might be some site that may not be materialized or materialized in time. That's why we have to be prudent in our work to take forward land creation. If we can give a buffer to the 3,000 hectares we need, that will be an appropriate approach. I will now turn to housing land supply. As the chief executive said, we have to resolve housing problem for the Hong Kong public. We need the determination to do so. Last year, we announced that we have identified 350 hectares of land for 2021-22 to 2030-31 to build 316,000 units of public housing. For the first time, we have exceeded the public housing demand for 10-year estimated under the long-term housing strategy. We have identified 350 hectares of land to produce 330,000 public housing units. It shows that we have started to see the effectiveness of our work. In relation to distribution is similar to that of last year. Supply mainly come from new development areas and major development areas, which account for about 39%. A number of sites will be rezoned to public housing. That accounts for about 36%. There are also a number of other projects, say a part of the land in the Fanling Golf Course, as well as brownfield site clusters with potential. That's about 20%. In the future, we will continue to monitor progress, especially the last 5 years. The Chief Executive has said that she has asked us and the Transport and Housing Bureau to update by way of reports. In terms of private housing development, we strive to, in the coming 10 years, provide 170 hectares of land by land sale or a tender of a railway land to provide about 100,000 private housing units. And out of this 100,000 private housing, about 40% of them comes from new development areas or new town extensions. About 46% of that will come from land sales outside the new development areas or new town extensions. Another 14% will come from railway property development, mainly from Tung Chung East Station as well as Siu Ho Wan superstructure development. We have not taken into account URA development projects because when it comes to redevelopment of urban areas, it's difficult to ascertain the figures. We have not taken into account private redevelopment projects. Subject to the findings of the studies and the assumed domestic plot ratio of 4 to 6.5, ongoing large-scale projects and projects under planning are expected to provide 400,000 to 500,000 public and private housing. That mainly comes from Hung Shui Kiu Ha Chun development, Yuen Long South development, as well as the Khao Yi Chao artificial island, as well as a number of projects in the north, in NT North. On top of that, there is the Northern Metropolis development strategy, which will provide 165,000 to 186,000 units. So after 2031 and 32, in the next 10 to 15 years, we can provide 565,000 to 686,000 housing units. Under the Northern Metropolis, some of them we will explore projects that are under studies or those will be studied into. That includes Lau Fao Shan, Chin Pei Choi, as well as Hung Shui Kiu Ha Chun projects. For nearshore reclamation, we will start Lung Ku Tan reclamation and replan Tuen Mun West project development. We will look at different configurations of land use. We also will revive the Ma Liu Shui reclamation and the reprovision of government facilities to caverns. That will give us 88 hectares of land for innovation and technology use. In the first half of 2026, we will submit our funding application. We hope that reclamation can start in 2027. In terms of Green Belt, the government previously has conducted studies of 2 stages. The first stage looks at idle green belt without vegetation. The second stage covers those with vegetation and government land with a lower buffer value. We will restart our systematic review on green belt zone. We will first focus on those with higher gradient and further from developed area with road linkage. We will also look at those under private and government land. We assess that it will cover about 300 hectares of land, which accounts for about 2% of all greenbelt zones in Hong Kong. We think that in mid-2022, we will complete the identification of greenbelt zone with development potential. After that, we will conduct further technical studies. In relation to streamlining approval process, That is a focus of our work. The steering group on streamlining development control under the Development Bureau started its work at the beginning of 2018. We have worked on 9 areas. We launched a streamlined approval process, which has been well received. In 2020, we have reviewed the purview of the steering group. We want to enable the government to more effectively review the streamlined process. We will focus on a statutory process. And legislation concerning town planning, land resumption, environmental impact assessment, road work, etc. will also be considered. We aim to make proposal at the beginning of next year and introduce legislative amendment within 2022. Regarding standard rate for premium assessment, the pilot scheme, when first launched, to make it more effective. At the beginning of this year, we have launched the pilot scheme for standard rate. It's been quite well received. Well, in relation to industrial redevelopment, there were only 3 cases. But with the pilot scheme, 5 cases have been submitted to choose the standard rate. 4 of these cases have already seen the completion of the land premium assessment. We think that it is more speedy compared to the conventional way. That's why the government has decided to extend the standard rate approach to land exchange cases in new development areas. There are some factors to be considered. We consider that they are of similar development environment, that is, in relation to high-density housing or mixed development with infrastructure. Compared to other sites in the new territories, they have a more favorable condition to use this approach. In Kulong North, Fanling North, in terms of land planning and development, using this approach will be conducive to leveraging private developers' ability to develop such land. We will work out the details with an objective to launch it in the first quarter next year. In relation to urban renewal, the government will continue to work with the URA to expedite the pace of urban renewal. We've just completed the planning study of Yamate and Mongkok. We will use new tools to speed up the process. For suitable projects, we will try to make use of transfer of plat ratio and street consolidation area. We hope that in 2022 we will be able to promulgate guidelines and start the first batch of zoning amendments so that the URA will be able to use the new approach as soon as possible. These new planning tools is also applicable to private redevelopment projects. If necessary, we may consider extending it to areas outside Yamate and Mongkok. We'll ask the URA to commence district planning studies in Chunwan and Shamshui-Po by looking at the land use, open space, community facilities, as well as a road network. They will come up with a redevelopment blueprint. They will also consider the different possibilities of adjusting development ratio and plot ratio in the area. One of the tools to expedite urban renewal is to make suitable adjustments of the compulsory sale threshold. Under the compulsory land sale ordinance. In the process, we will strike a balance between the need to redevelop and the need to protect private property rights. We'll also fully consider those small owners that are affected by these redevelopment projects. In the coming 12 to 8 months, we will start a policy research. We'll take into account past experience and different cases. We'll also consult stakeholders such as owners' corporations before we make a proposal to the LegCo of policy direction. We will look into different compulsory sale thresholds and possible lowering of the threshold. Say currently, for those above the age of 50 is 80%. We will consider whether to break it down further to set a lower threshold for all the buildings. Industrial buildings in non-industrial areas. Will the threshold be adjusted compared to industrial buildings in other areas to make it easier for land sale? I now move on to investing in capital works. The government will continue to invest in infrastructure to improve people's livelihood and to support economic development as well as to create more jobs. We will use investment in capital works as a main stimulus to stimulate the economy in an anti-cyclical period. I thank the LegCo for their approval of funding for public works, which has reached a record high of 220 billion. We expect the government's annual capital expenditure will exceed 100 billion in coming years. We will more extensively use MIC approach. We will also make use of Construction 2.0 to take the lead to reform the trade. Over 60% has adopted MIC, that is Modular Integrated Construction approach, and I thank the sector for their cooperation. I do believe that in the future we will see a brighter prospect. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Media friends, good morning. I'm sure you all know that finding land to build houses is the uppermost task for the current term of government, and we have strived to increase land supply by finding more lands. And right now we have found 350 hectares of land. Let me try to get a PowerPoint. So, media friends, let me start again. Funding land to build houses, of course, you know, is of utmost importance to the current term of government. All along, we've strived to find more land to increase housing supply. Right now, we have found 350 hectares of land, which is enough for the next decade to build 330,000 public housing units. Our figures, compared to the figures announced last year, are higher. By the end of this year, the long-term housing development strategy 2021 annual report will cover details on the objective of housing supply and relevant data. And the government also, in increasing housing supply, will also brief you on the latest progress. The current term of government within the 5-year term actually manages to provide 96,500 public housing units, an increase of 30,000. In order to have more units built in the shortest period of time, Hong Kong Housing Authority and Housing Society would make wider use of the MIC and also brand new technology. And the Housing Authority and and society in Tongchong, Anderson Road, Lam Tin, and Hong Shui Kiu will build 6 blocks using the MIC construction method. And they will also actively take forward more projects using the MIC method. The Housing Authority will also, in appropriate items and projects, allow contractors to undertake design and construction. In the new procurement and construction model, the Housing Department would also provide all the layout and development parameters for the contractors to carry out detailed design and carry out the construction. The relevant arrangement can actually use technology and resources from the private sector and to optimize the entire construction method and workflow. And the construction project would also allow contractors to actually, in terms of workflow and building work, have more flexibility so as to enhance productivity. The Housing Authority all along has followed existing policies and the actual situation to redevelop aged public housing estates. 2 of the oldest public housing estates in Hong Kong, that is Sai Wan Estate and Mata Wai Estate, will be repositioned, and we could provide even more units after redevelopment. The government would ask the Housing Authority to rebuild the 2 estates. We also strive to, in the surrounding lands, incorporate them into the redevelopment sites so that during the process of redevelopment, the additional land created can be used to build even more housing units. Our preliminary estimate is that the Kawai Man Road near Sai Wan Estate and the Tokwaran Road near Mata Wan Estate could be used as additional resources for the redevelopment. With the redevelopment, both estates could provide a total of 5,000 units. And also, the Urban Renewal Authority will, together with the Hong Kong Sector Housing Corporation, to jointly redevelop Hai Han Sai Estate, providing more than 3,300 units, of which 1,300 units would be used to rehouse existing tenants, and about 2,000 units would be used as starter homes units. In order to improve people's living environment, the current term of government has launched transitional housing cash allowance pilot scheme and also legislated on tenancy control for subdivided flats. Those are groundbreaking measures. We have acquired enough land earlier to provide 15,000 transitional housing units, and to help improve living environment of people, we will actually adjust the goal of transitional housing to 20,000, and also the amount of subsidy will be raised to 11.6 billion Hong Kong dollars. The task force on transitional housing are now liaising with various NGOs and also scrutinizing various idle government and private sites for the possibility of developing transitional housing. As for the cash allowance trial scheme, you can see from the policy address that by the end of August, cash allowances disbursed have been actually made available to 30,000 eligible general applicant households. By now, more than 50,000 eligible general applicant households have been given cash allowances, which make up actually close to 85% of the applications received. We'll expedite our work to provide for eligible households the cash allowance. For tenancy control on subdivided units, next Wednesday, we'll see the resumption of second reading of the bill to implement tenancy control. We hope LegCo will pass the bill as soon as possible so it can be implemented in January next year to provide for residents of subdivided flats reasonable and effective protection. And the Rating Evaluation Department will form a team of 15 members to help the public understand the new tenancy control scheme and to deal with consultation as well as provide information on the issues and also mediation services. After the implementation of the new law, we will also disseminate information of the subdivided flats and any flats that have broken the law and enforcement action taken. The government will also appoint NGOs to set up service teams at the district level to provide tenants and landlords all the support they need, and also to set up an information portal so that landlords and households can understand under the new law what kind of rights and statutory obligations they have, and also to provide information on subdivided flats. And the tendering work has begun. We expect to have 6 service teams to be district in various districts before the implementation of the new law. And now I'm going to brief you on the new initiatives in the transportation area. In order to further promote infrastructure in Greater Bay Area, the Hong Kong and Shenzhen government has set up the Task Force for Hong Kong-Shenzhen Cooperation on Cross-Boundary Railway Infrastructure so as to jointly develop the GBA on the rail. And the Hong Kong government is actively considering through the Northern Link Spur line to connect it through the with the Hong Kong port, Guangdong port in Shenzhen. And we'll also explore together with Shenzhen optimize transportation links at the Lo Wu port. And we also embark on the study on the Hong Kong-Shenzhen West Rail Link connecting Hung Shui Kiu and Qianhai, so as to enhance Hong Kong's transportation link with Shenzhen West. On the Northern Metropolis Development Strategy, besides the cross-boundary railway projects, in the existing Lo Wu and Zhengshu stations, there will be an additional train station, and the Northern Link will be moved eastward. The preliminary conception will hinge on further studies by the Development Bureau to consider planning for various sites and also the estimated population growth, people employed there, and development timetable will try to satisfy the transportation links of future residents and people working there in the future. Besides, the Hong Kong government, together with the Guangdong government and the relevant authorities on the mainland, we are looking into making arrangements for implementation of the quota-free scheme for Hong Kong private cars traveling to Guangdong. And we also try to simplify the procedures and lower the fees. Both parties actually have agreed on creating a new land port boundary crossing for people going to Shenzhen so that Hong Kong travelers can have actually enjoy the quota-free scheme for transportation into the Guangdong province. For local transport infrastructure, we have asked MTRC on the extension of the Jimun South and the East Rail Network and Hung Shui Kiu and the Jimun South extension, carry out further study to see what can be done to meet the growing needs in the New Territories area. We are actually looking at the New Territories Northeast transportation scheme so as to improve the road network there.
There are 5 major projects. That includes first, Route 11, Yuen Long and North Lantau, 2, Tsingyi to Lantau Link, 3, widening of Yuen Long Highway section between Lam Tay and Tong Yan San Chun, 4, Tuen Mun Bypass, and 5, road improvement works within Tuen Mun. These projects will be completed in stages between 2031 and 2036. The National 14th Five-Year Plan has clearly specified their support to Hong Kong to enhance our status as an international aviation hub. It's also proposed that in the Greater Bay Area there will be a world-class airport cluster. The government will assist the airport authority to enhance Hong Kong Airport's function as a transition hub. We're working at full steam to take forward the third runway system project. Under the vision of Airport City, we have started a number of projects under the artificial island of the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge Hong Kong Boundary Port. That includes the automated car park for use of passengers and the airport city link linking the artificial island as well as the Sky City. When the third runway operates in 2024, the capacity of the Hong Kong airport will be greatly enhanced, and we will have a favorable condition to become the bridge between China and the rest of the world, as well as international travel. We are a shipping hub. The Hong Kong airport is determined to launch intermodal transport. The airport authority has started several projects that include upstream logistic park as well as airside sea air intermodal cargo facility, so that freight from the mainland can seamlessly make use of the airport's airside cargo facility to be linked to the rest of the world. And it can also be used the other way around. This is a brand new approach which greatly enhances the connectivity of the Greater Bay Area. This will further play into Hong Kong's potential as an air freight transfer hub, which in turn will boost our economic development as well as create more job opportunities. At the end of the year, the airport authority will trial the intermodal cargo initiatives between Dongguan. Last year, the central authority have expressed their support of our government to inject equity into the Zhuhai airport. Both sides are in active liaison to follow up on the equity injection to maximize the economic benefit of both places and to ensure long-term economic development of both places. At the same time, we're working with Guangdong province to work a high-end aviation industry cluster, including aircraft maintenance, aircraft parts distribution, aircraft engineering, professional research and training, etc. As you know, that Hong Kong has a quality port and advanced shipping businesses. In order to better seize the opportunities of the 14th Five-Year Plan and to better integrate into the national development, we will plan the Hong Kong ports so that it will better coordinate, that it will work better with mainland ports in the Greater Bay Area, which in turn will consolidate our international shipping center status. The Development Bureau has set up a Hong Kong Maritime and Port Board to work with the trade to launch Smart Port Development Plan. We will start our legislative amendment work for maritime businesses, including ship management, ship agency, and ship brokering services, by providing tax concessions to them to attract them to set up presence in Hong Kong. We'll also set up 7 locations of regional desks of the Hong Kong Shipping Registry. In terms of logistics industry development, we will make use of sea, land, air intermodal operation and develop high value-added logistics. We'll continue to work with the trade to facilitate flow of logistics information in the Greater Bay Area. We will continue to leverage on our advantage as a regional logistic hub. We'll also seize the opportunity of the 14th Five-Year Plan and the Greater Bay Area Online Development Plan. At different stages, at the end of this year, we will, by way of a tender, sell 2 sites in Qingyi and Kwai Chung. They are the port backup sites in order to develop modern logistic development. On top of that, in October last year, we have also launched a subsidy scheme for third-party logistic service supply. It amounts to $300 million. As of September this year, we have already subsidized 101 projects involving $66 million. We have land shortage and a huge population. In order to meet transportation needs, we have made use of technology by launching smart mobility. Starting from the middle of next year, we will issue tax to private car owners so that they will be able to make use of it under the free flow tolling system. They will be able to use it in government toll tunnels as well as the Changsha controlled area. We will also make use of the traffic e-enforcement system. We think that they will be commissioned by stages in 2023. This will enhance our enforcement efficiency. Thank you. Please raise your hand, identify yourself and the organization you represent before asking questions. Hello, I'm from RTHK. First, I'd like to ask Secretary for Development. You talk about 2030 plus in 2016, and the estimate was too conservative. You said that now the land shortage is 3,000 hectares, which is an increase by 1,800 hectares. Well, what do you think the population increase is? We see there is a wave of emigration. Do you think we still need that much land? For residential development in commercial areas, you think that there will be people from the mainland coming to Hong Kong? The cost of Lantau tomorrow is over $6 trillion. What do you think will the situation be? In relation to the 2030 plus, we have made reference of data collected from our statistics. The latest data show that, well, 8.1 million people by 2040. So there is an increase about 600,000. So there is an increase in population. When we estimate housing land demand, we will need to look at the number of increase in household. The increase in number of households is slower than increase in population, because every household will there will be less people, from 2.8 to 2.6 people in every household. So we need to make preparations for no increase in number of households and make proper preparations. In the future, we're talking about 1 million public-private housing unit demand. Apart from the increase of number of households, we need another 300,000 units of housing from redevelopment. That's the basis of our data. We will then put in some buffer before we work out the forecast. In relation to project cost estimate, when we first floated 1,000 hectares of reclaimed land, that's why it's 260 billion. I said at that time that it is an exceptional approach. We first started the planning and engineering study to give us more accurate figures. At that time, the chief executive said that we have experienced extraordinary circumstances in the previous 2 years. Now we are back to normal. As soon as we have project cost of individual projects, we will tell you. Please look at page 37 of the 2030 Plus. You see that total number of land supply for Northern Metropolis is 2,207 hectares. For the 1,670 hectares that we have identified, they are potential sites. In relation to anti-north new development area, it covered the eastern part of the Northern Metropolis, Shantin, Lok Ma Chau, Mankham To, Peng Chair Wat, and Queens Hill. We obtained about $1 billion from the LegCo for studies. We have not come up with the total cost because we need more information to work it out. We have this document, Northern Metropolis Development Strategy. It's not about the area of the metropolis. In many different areas, we have adopted creative and novel thinking. We've always put the focus to the south, and that's the old approach. In the past, we have not attached as much importance to the north. But now, we can address the unbalanced development. Secondly, there is clear positioning of land use. I talked about twin cities and 3 circles in the Northern Metropolis. That is, in Lau Fau Shan, Hong Shui Kiu, we want to create a modern service industry hub. In Shantin, Lok Ma Chau, we want to focus on innovation and technology to inject new impetus to our economy. We want to fully use the opportunities of the Greater Bay Area development as well as the 14th Five-Year Plan. There is also an element of conservation near the Ramsar site, also the Mears Bay Conservation Area. To the east, we will dovetail with tourism development with the mainland. This will create a lot of job opportunities and meet housing needs. For the northern metropolis, a large area will be covered by research and studies that have already started or will start. I'm from Tai Kung Pao. My name is Chao. I have two questions. First, in relation to northern metropolis, we see in the policy address that they will have to wait till the next term of government to create a deputy secretary of department to head the development. We are concerned that within this term of government, what are the deliverables that you can deliver in relation to the northern metropolis? Can you give us more details? What do you expect you'll be able to deliver within this term of government? You also talk about existing development projects in the northern metropolis and a number of railway developments. Will the new development strategy affect existing projects because you have added a number of other projects? In relation to cross-boundary railway services, under this policy address, there are a number of new ones. Has there been any discussions and communications between Hong Kong and the central authorities or mainland authorities? Do you have a timetable for these cross-boundary railway projects? 5 years, 10 years? How long will it take? Third question is in relation to land and housing supply. In 2030 Plus and other reports, we see that for land supply is about 4,000 hectares, which is in the middle and long term. We see that in the past few years, supply of public housing have failed to reach the target set under the long-term housing strategy. So in terms of yearly supply, when will we be able to reach the targets set under the long-term housing strategy? Let me first answer about the implementation of Northern Metropolis and government reorganization. The chief executive has already made it very clear that she's just floating some ideas for further discussion. We won't wait on a policy bureau level. We will start our work immediately. Let me give you some more information. Well, we have Anti-North New Development Area. We have obtained about $1 billion. We have almost completed first stage study. The scope of the study will be adjusted to take into account Northern Metropolis Development Strategy. There will be more land surrounding San Tin. We will include the 20 plus hectares near the Lok Ma Chau boundary control point. There was the Man Kam To logistic belt. Now we have made some adjustments. Between Sheung Shui and Lo Wu, there will be a Lo Wu South train station. We will make adjustments to the scope of studies as well as some parameters and baselines. We hope that this will not affect the time it will take to complete the studies. A soon to start study will take about 36 months. I mentioned about the Northern Link extension. We will use this as the basis of the study. We still hope that the study will be completed within 36 months. There will be new studies. Near the development area, then may in Lau Fau Shan, Park Lai, Chim Pei Choi, there are no studies planned. But we have commenced studies for Hong Shui Kiu Ha Chun. We will, as a result, start new studies that will take about 18 months. If everything goes smoothly, then we will move on to planning and engineering study. Apart from Lau Fau Shan, Park Lai, Chim Pei Choi, there is also the north of Kutong North, that is Ma Chou Long. There will be about 40 hectares of land. We hope to start a preliminary technical feasibility study which will take 18 months. If it goes smoothly, then we will go into planning and engineering studies. In terms of manpower, let me tell you this. We've started the study on Khao Yi Chao in June. For NT North development studies, it will soon start. Project consultant will take the lead under our monitoring and oversight. As I said, we will embark upon new studies. In other words, we will not have the luxury to rest. There is clear aspiration from Hong Kong. We should lose no time to move ahead.
Mr. Chan, on the reporter's point about cross-boundary projects, the SAO government has done a lot of work in the past. Just then, I said to you that Hong Kong and Shenzhen have set up a task force on cooperation on cross-boundary railway infrastructure, and its work covers the East Rail, possible extension to Lowell, and it also covers the Northern Link spur line being extended to the new Huanggang port and Hong Shui Kiu Tianhai Railway project. So to give you a bit more details, on the task force led by me, and also we had a meeting with the Deputy Mayor of Shenzhen. Under the task force, we have set up a study group. And the study group would, on Hong Shui Kiu Tianhai link, activated Phase 1 study. And the Phase 1 study covers the feasibility and strategic value. And next year, we would finish the study concerned, and then we'll begin Phase 2 study. For Phase 2 study, that will include the alignment and detailed plan. So you can see that advanced work actually has begun, and we are moving towards, trying to completing the task. As for the actual alignment, planning, and timetable, since this is a cross-boundary railway infrastructure, we need actually to have negotiations with Shenzhen, and also on the basis of the development plans of Hong Kong and Shenzhen, we have to lay down a timetable. And so far, work has been smooth. And as I said, for all the various projects, would that have a negative impact on other projects? I can guarantee you that Hong Kong government's team is very hardworking, And you may not be aware of the work that we've done, but we actually have been swimming pretty hard. So whenever there's any new progress, we will report to you in due course. As for land supply and housing, looking at the long-term development strategy and report in the past, the figures in those reports, for the long-term development planning, by last year, we managed to find enough land to meet the target for the 10-year housing supply. And this year, the housing supply available is higher than last year's. In the coming decade, the demand for public housing units is 331,000 units. And we've got adequate land to build 330,000 public housing units. So the government has done a lot. Looking further back to early years, you would say not so far ago, we were talking about finding a land to build only about 200,000 units. So the progression from 200,000 to 330,000 units, that's a big leap. So you can see that land development is full of challenges. And Hong Kong's land, whether it's brownfield site or other types of land, from a raw site into an available plot for development, it has to go through various sorts of procedures and infrastructural work, such as site formation. So no matter what, under the long-term strategy for 10-year period, and the housing supply and housing units have actually targets set. In the coming 5 years, the supply of public housing units, the construction work has basically been activated. For public housing units to be provided next year, work had begun several years ago. So today we are talking about, in our forthcoming projects, that will happen or be completed in 6, 7, 8 years. But we are expediting our work through the design and building construction approach. We hope that the completion of public housing units can happen earlier than scheduled, and that's what we're working towards. Okay, lady in black. I'm from Citizen News. I want to ask you about 12 years ago, at the construction of the high-speed rail station, West Kowloon was chosen instead of Kam Sheung Road. And now you're talking about building railway links in Hung Shui Kiu. Is it proven that West Kowloon was a wrong choice back in those days? And passenger volume at West Kowloon is not as much as expected, and there's budget overruns. How can you ensure that the same problems will not occur with Hung Shui Kiu? And my second question is for Secretary Chan Fan. Now, with the split of bureaus, do you think that you are more suitable to do transport work or housing work? Well, for railway development, it has to tie in with Hong Kong's overall development and long-term social economic needs. Well, for the choice of location of the high-speed rail in West Kowloon, looking back, the decision was right. Well, the low passenger volume, well, it is what's happening today, and also since 2019, the black cat violence then. Looking at the high-speed rail and its popularity, looking at the purchase of tickets during holidays and major festivals, well, it's so difficult to get a ticket during those peak seasons. And as for Hung Shui Kiu and reclamation projects, as I said, there will be a study group formed doing preliminary study, and also we will have negotiations with relevant parties to decide on the alignment. That is, where in Qianhai should be the station to be built, and where do we have the co-location. All these are major issues. If you can recall, in the building of the high-speed rail station, the passage of the legislation on co-location took huge amount of time in LegCo. I sat in LegCo for more than 100 hours. So I think that in the future, if it involves co-location again in the future work, I'm sure there will be a lot of issues to be tackled. And as Secretary for Transport Housing, I discussed it with the Secretary for Development. We now should focus on dealing with the urgent tasks, things that should be done. We just do our job well. And for other matters, we will listen to public opinions. And we'll also look at work efficiency and see what decisions should be made.
Next question. The gentleman over there in the second row. Good morning, I'm from Hong Kong Economic Journal. I'd like to ask 2030 plus. There is an item in relation to space per capita. For public and private housing, the assessment is higher than that in 2016. However, in recent years, for flats in public and private housing, the size has been getting smaller and smaller. What do you think? Now there is this updated assessment. Would you change the forecast into an objective to make sure that it will happen? I'd like to also ask about Northern Metropolis. Apart from housing development, you also mentioned that you would like to resume wetland sites in wetland areas. Would that include land owned by private developers? There are a lot of ongoing projects by private developers near wetland. Will that affect the development of the Northern Metropolis? And how would you what will be your consideration of current projects? I'd like to also ask about streamlining town planning ordinances and relevant ordinances. Currently, it will take about 12 to 18 months to complete an OZP process. After the streamlining, how long will it take? By how much time will you be able to shorten the time required? For 2030 plus, it reflects the aspiration, or it reflects the fact that the space per capita is rather small. That is a problem for Hong Kong people. For Kao Yi Chiao, we're talking about 150, 160,000 units. 70% of it will be public housing. We have already added 10 to 20% in our planning of public housing. If our work materializes, you will see that the number of public housing will increase by about 10%. For the first 5 years, as Mr. Chan said, that for public housing, they are in different stages. In a second 5-year period, when we start planning for public housing, will we use the new standard? It depends on whether we can keep increasing the supply year by year. For NT North new development area and some new areas in the Northern Metropolis, say for example public housing in Kwu Tung North, Fanling North, construction has started, but for those that have yet to start the planning, we will similarly add 10 to 20% increase. For 4P public PRX unit is 30 to 35 square feet, less than 400 square feet. If we add 10%, it's close to 480 square feet. We will persevere to try to make it happen. For private housing, there is this suggestion that for future land sale, we should set the minimum flat size of about 220 or 250 square feet. That is something that we may consider. We want to make sure that we will be able to achieve a bigger space per capita for Hong Kong people. For wetland conservation area and wetland buffer, we're talking about 3,100 hectares of land. 150 hectares of land will be affected by our proposed project, so the percentage of affected area is lower, is on the low side. Well, for other areas, it is under the purview of the Environmental and the Environment Bureau. You will hear from the Secretary in the afternoon. The current approach is rather passive. By that I mean that if a site has got a higher ecological value, we will designate it as a wetland buffer or wetland conservation area. But the ownership is still in the hands of private developer. We can't make them do certain things, but we can stop them from doing certain things. You can see that for fish pond that is not being in use is taken over by vegetation. As a result, there is a very low ecological value. We will, for conservation purpose, resume land. Then the government will be able to decide what to do with the site. Mr. Albert a legislator asked a question yesterday. He asked whether agricultural land will be considered. Well, the chief executive has already answered. For further information, you need to wait for the press conference in the afternoon. In relation to streamlining a process, I'll defer to the permanent secretary. Slide 11 of the presentation. I'd like to give you more information. This involves a legislative process, and it covers more than just the town planning ordinance. We'll look at land resumption ordinance and statutory inspection period under the road works ordinance. In the slide, you see that there are 4 areas. First, we would like to compress the time required to complete the statutory process. Under the town planning ordinance, the statutory process can take as long as 17 months to formulate a draft OZP. Is it possible for us to compress the time by, say, 50%? The second area is to avoid duplication of certain process. For the same development project under different ordinances, they will at the same time deal with opposition from the public. Say, for example, for residential development, one can lodge an objection under road work. There may be another objection by the same person. We would consider whether to consider that objection as one single objection on different areas. Another area is to take forward different procedures in parallel. For reclamation projects, it will take several years. Perhaps we can go ahead with reclamation and at the same time deal with land use zoning or planning. Another example is that there is a rezoning application that has been processed by Town Planning Board. There are some minor procedures that are required. Can we do it at the same time to deal with settlement and compensation? The last area we need to streamline is to rationalize obsolete or controversial arrangements. Say, currently anyone can object to rezoning applications of land owned by someone else. Would it unnecessarily prolong the process? Can we streamline it? We hope to make proposals in the first half of next year so that the electrical can have a discussion.
Gentleman in grey jacket, Economic Times. In 2030 plus, the demand, I have a question about that. Well, you've adjusted the amount. Well, there's now an increase in economic land. Have you assessed, well, because we're talking about long-term planning, would it be because of future economic situation or changes in development modes? Would there be any mismatch in economic land? And also about supply. Last time, when we had the land supply consultation, besides the shortfall of 1,200 hectares, we also talk about the serious shortfalls in the medium to long term. So the 3,000 hectares shortfall overall, would there be any fluctuations in the short term? And you said you've identified 4,100 hectares of land, so it's quite a big buffer, 30 to 60% in relation to the 3,000 hectares. If you need 3,000 hectares, why do you need 4,100 hectares? And also, it was asked about a per capita living space. You're proposing about per capita living space of about 200 square feet. With the high property price now, the units to be built by you, well, if you want to have that kind of per capita living space, if the space cost for private property is $20,000 per square feet, any housing policy can be implemented as a support measure. Well, I asked you about answer your question on buffer. First, we're not talking about the individual shortfall. We assumed there were 3,600 hectares of shortfall. Well, we actually ended up find 7,900. The buffer should be about 10%. As I said, our Census and Statistics Department, our baseline and population projection, there is a gap of about 10%. So to have appropriate buffer, during the land supply debate and also in discussions in electoral, for example, we could see that like in Singapore, they did a good job and they would not actually create bottleneck in housing or land supply. And we wouldn't want the land issue or land supply to be an insurmountable bottleneck. Therefore, we need to be prepared with more land. So I think the buffer rate is appropriate. Well, for the medium long-term situation, yes, it's a sore point. If you look at a period within 10 years as medium term, then we are seeing yes, some possible figures, but from now to coming 5 years, then we are actually subject to various constraints. But through our streamlining of procedures, as I said in one interview, if we could do it, then we would try to, but the 6th year, the supply for the 6th year can be pushed forward to the 5th year, or 7-year supply could be made available in the 6 years instead. So even if we get an additional 1,000 or 10,000 units, that would be something positive. Mr. Chen? As for living in a bigger flat, in a better living environment, or at a cheaper rate, That's not something impossible, but it takes time to arrive at that. Land supply, on the one hand, if it's in abundance, then housing authority and policy-wise would consider what to do with it. But what do you mean by abundant housing supply? That is when people living in subdivided flats, apart from those who choose to live in those flats because of the needs of the job, we do hope that everyone can be accommodated in proper housing. So when the land supply is abundant, then we can make adjustment in our supply of units. But Mr. Wong just said that in the medium long term, we need to do some catching up. That is to try to fill the gap between supply and need. In the northern Metropolis region or even in the Kaicha artificial island, if the land available there can meet the overall need in Hong Kong, then there's really room for us to adjust the per capita living space. And you also said that, well, with a high property price, well, we need to understand that for any commodity, the price hinges on supply and demand. When the supply is relatively abundant, then I'm sure the price would come down or be adjusted. Looking at the current housing policy, our newly increased land, 70% of that will be used for building public housing units. And within that 70% of land, 30% will be used for subsidized flats for sale. So there will be this sector of subsidized flats for sale. You know that the price of these flats are delinked from market price, and we will charge on the basis of the tenants or landlords' household income. So basically, it would depend on the median income of the households, relevant households, so that the flats will be more affordable for families in the medium grassroots category can spend on their flats with less than 50% of their income. So there are various policy arrangements to try to help families in need if they want to purchase their own flat. So there's a channel for that. So under our housing policy, it's clear we are to help provide for the grassroots a living safety net. And that makes up the largest proportion of our supply. 70% of the public housing units actually are for public rental. And I believe that it's important to note that for the grassroots, we must look after them to provide them with public housing units. Or for those living in public housing units, and if they have financial difficulties, still they can apply for Social Security, CSSA, in the form of rental subsidy. And right now, even for some grassroots families, if they have no choice but to live in subdivided flats, if they are in financial difficulty, they also can apply for CSSA, which can provide for them rental subsidy to ease their financial pressure. So that's our overall plan. But of course, in a short time, providing them with permanent homes, and you can see that we're providing cash allowance to provide some sort of relief for grassroots families, and we also strive to build more transitional housing in the coming year or so, or to 2023 even. We are talking about supply of 15,000 transitional housing, most of which have been built or available. So by the early half of next year, about 5,000 of them will be completed and available. So we hope that for people living in an appropriate environment, they can have one more choice.
Last two questions. First, let's see if there There is any English questions? The lady in white.
Pearl, just to rehash the question asked by Economics Times. So, is it possible for the government to discourage property developers to roll out nano flats, improve per capita living space, or put a cap on rent? Why are they so hard to achieve? Are there any other ways to alleviate the housing woes, especially for subdivided flat tenants, over the short term? And the second question is, over the northern metropolis, what is mentioned previously, about the counter proposals set up previously that the government said in 2009 that it was not feasible, but now that with the northern metropolis, all the infrastructure and transport link, trying to establish the linkage with the mainland, is it like a self-defeating proposal now?
Well, put it this way. You asked about how we are going to, help solve the plight of the residents who live in subdivided units. As we all know that we have put forward a bill on tenancy control for subdivided unit tenancy, okay? And with that, we are offering these subdivided unit residents the kind of support to limit the rent increase when they gone through the first regulated tenancy to the second regulated tenancy. And also in respect of the charges other than rent. The landlord will not be able to charge anything more than the rent. And if they are going to recover common utility fees, then they have to demonstrate and show to the tenant, as well as the total number of fees they are going to collect, to be not more than what they have to pay to the utility companies, okay? And also, these residents at the subdivided units are entitled to a renewal of another 2 years to ensure that they have an adequate span of time of housing or accommodation. And this is one. And on top of that, we are offering cash subsidies for anyone who are waiting for public rental housing and who are not receiving a CSSA. And therefore, we are offering them the kind of cash subsidy to alleviate their financial burden. And on top of that, we are building more transitional housing units so that for those who are living in subdivided units, they have a chance to move on to the transitional housings and then move over to the public rental housing. Of course, as we know, for all those who are now residing in subdivided units, roughly about half of them have applied for public rental housing, and the rest have all the reasons for not applying, okay? So we are, as a matter of fact, very concerned and care about the resident in subdivided units, and we will provide them with whatever support we can. But also, as I mentioned in my address earlier, that we are forming altogether 6 teams of district support teams to help those residents who are living in subdivided units so that they will not be deprived of their rights while staying in subdivided units. Thank you.
好，最後兩個提問啦。第三行黑色衫。
Last 2 questions. The lady in black. I'm from Mingpao. Just now, Mr. Chen talked about the task force with Shenzhen has started their work. Have they talked about project cost and the apportionment of the costs? We're talking about $100 billion dollars in past infrastructure projects. Are we talking about another railway project that will cost another $100 billion? In relation to construction and operation of railway lines, would you introduce competition instead of just giving it to the MTRC? Just now, there is the streamlining process as well as work of the task force for Hong Kong Shenzhen Corporation. I haven't heard anything about public consultation. Is it the future direction of the work of the government to reduce public consultation. When they have come up with a proposal, when the task force has come up with a proposal, they will simply be given to the government to implement. What about vacancy tax for first-hand property? Is it not going to be realized? In relation to cross-boundary railway, that's one in the Hongshui-Q and Tianhai. If it is cross-boundary, then there will be discussion by both sides. An agreement is needed. It depends on the actual situation. In relation to cost, we will mainly consider how to fund it. For past projects, we will make use of railway plus development. You ask about consultation. If it is within Hong Kong, we will use the established procedure. So there is no conflict with the existing approach. Regarding the task force of Hong Kong Shenzhen Corporation, the first stage is more about a strategic planning. The second stage will be the alignment. On first-hand property vacancy tax, when the bill was withdrawn from LegCo, we made it clear that we have taken into account the then economic situation. We'll continue to monitor the situation. If there is a need, we may consider it, but it's not an appropriate time given the epidemic. Last question. South China Morning Post.
From the South China Morning Post. First question is about the Northern Metropolis. So there's no new transport connection to link the Metropolis to Kowloon or Hong Kong Island. So will there be a new rail line or railway to increase capacity? And in terms of the housing mix and jobs offered there, will it predominantly be public housing? And what kind of jobs will there be apart from IT? And in terms of extending standard rates for premium assessment to land exchange and NDAs, how much more efficient would that make the process of negotiation between the stakeholders, and what is the expected impact on land revenue? And also, in the 4,100 hectares of possible land spaces, most of them are only available after 2031 and 2032 in terms of population intake. So which projects actually can be available within the next 10 years, and what can be done to alleviate the short-term housing, the shortage in the short term? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for the questions. Maybe I'll answer the third and second one first. You're indeed right in observing that when we talk about the longer-term supply, most of them will actually come on stream, especially if you talk about first move-in after 2030. So for the coming few years, there are still a lot of major projects coming on stream. Tung Chung Extension. It is a community ultimately housing over 60,000 households. So the supply will actually start to come 2023, 2024. The other major one will be Kutong North, Fanning North. Major intake 2026, 2027. Hong Shui-Ko Haojin and other NDA, major intake around 2030. So there are a lot of projects on which we are already working. They will also provide a much needed housing supply. And that's why I think in our joint presentation with Frank, you do see a continuous increase in the number of public housing units that we're able to come up with within the next 10 years. So that's the first question. On standard rates, I think we have applied it to certain lease modification applications relating to industrial buildings. The responses so far have been very positive, and I've quoted some of the figures. I do not intend to repeat them there. So we think it's a logical step to extend it further to land exchange within the NDAs. We do not have a minimum figure, just like the last time when we introduced the standard rate mechanism to lease modifications involving industrial buildings. We do not have a minimal figure. But we do think that if it's a good policy, if it does help to facilitate and quicken some of the procedures, people, the market, which will opt to use this avenue. So that's our view. On the question relating to transport, I'll refer to Frank.
Thank you. Firstly, we have to take the whole picture when we are talking about a new metropolis of the size of 300 square kilometers. And the development would take, as K.K. Ling has mentioned, roughly about 20 years. And before any railway project is completed, we have to take care of the transport need of those who are residing in the district or going there to work. And therefore, as we all know, the public transport of Hong Kong is excellent in terms of cost and convenience. And therefore, these transport needs could be handled by public transport, such as buses, resident services, minibuses. And they could equally do an excellent job at a time of need. And I would say that while we are planning for the railway systems, we don't have to worry about it because the public transport systems in Hong Kong, in terms of buses and other transport modes, will take care of it. And in terms of the short-term housing for those who are living in subdivided units or costly accommodation, the ultimate solution is to increase the supply of housing, particularly public housing. And therefore, as I had explained earlier, that in the next 5 years, the supply is fairly certain, while we are working very hard together with the Development Bureau to make sure that the land will be made available in time for the construction of public housing. And of course, the Development Bureau will also work very hard to ensure that land for private housing is also available. And with lands being made available, then we would be in a position to speed up the production, to enhance the capacity of production, so that more flats will be made available to Hong Kong people, irrespective they are public or private. Thank you.
好，時間關係，真係要喺度結束啦記者會，唔該晒大家。
That's the end of the press conference. Thank you.
Thank you.